Plated Traditions channel. Welcome to the Plated Traditions channel with your host Kendra Moses. This is the Plated Traditions.
Hello and welcome to the Plated Traditions channel. My name is Kendra Moses, and as always, by my resident Chef Kai off camera. So this week we are revisiting a topic we touched on at the beginning of this year, and that's time. But we are now revisiting time this week in regards specifically to the recipe. Time, like, what are you talking about and does it really matter, is another one of those elements that comes across when it comes to looking at a recipe and looking at the endeavor that you're about to go into when you're entering your kitchen to start cooking. It's one of those things that I don't think we give enough attention or credence to until that very moment when it could end up having a either adverse effect or lead you to feel a bit flustered, because it's one of those factors that we forget to incorporate when we're going to execute something. And I actually find this amazing because we as a species, we're absolutely obsessed when it comes to time. We could give any reason possible as to why our time is so important to us. And it makes you wonder, is it a subconscious or maybe a conscious ideology of knowing that, I guess, as a sentient being, that time is ever moving? And with it being ever moving, we know we have a finite amount of time to do whatever we need to do. And when I talk about a finite amount of time, I'm not just talking about you have an 8-hour shift on your job and you have to clear a whole pallet and do 2 other things or a long checklist of things before that's 8 hours are up. And you have to have it done. That's a requirement. That's something that is going to come down on you at a certain point in time. And a lot of us are very familiar with this aspect. I'm familiar with this aspect. I still have a day job. So in my day job, ideally 4 hours would be the most comfortable amount of time to do what I have to do first thing in the morning. But my job essentially has to be done in 2 hours before we open. So everyone understands that concept of time and it being finite and you having about only a certain amount of time to do everything you need or want to do. Because Plated Traditions is still a humble and modest entity still. So we knew it was going to take some time for any visibility, especially on a platform as large as this. And so that's the first thing you start to think about, though, when it comes to social media. And I think we think about time in regards to social media more so than we do things like a recipe. And that's why I kind of want to pull that in, because, like I said, when we came here, when we knew that we were going beyond like a minute short into 15 minutes was called a long format. And given the average attention span and given so much content out there that people are really anxious to just look and flick through, so you only have about a few seconds sometimes in order to engage their interest. So when we started the long format, and we thought it was going to be a slow process, but the thing about anything, about Plated Traditions, about you going in your own kitchen, about me talking right now, when you do certain things like this, when you take your time, actually, just in general, if it's not a necessity, like based on like room and board and wages and things of that nature, hopefully what you're doing is essentially, as cliche as it may sound, a labor of love, something that you're actually interested in. So you don't let that stop you and you go forward. And so we were actually amazed and pleasantly surprised to see even double digits for longer format videos. And these are the videos that were like over 20 minutes. Thank you for everyone who did look, and thank you if you're brand new to the channel and looking now. But these are things that we did consider. The first thing aspect as far as how long it's going to take us is how long it may take anyone to see it based on how long amount of time they will have to take out of their schedule in order to just hear me chat along about traditions and foods and recipes. These are things that I think are so amazing because these are the type of things we take the time out to gauge about the aspect of time for things like even this social media, and of course our jobs, and of course our schedules. Of course, those are like automatic things that we think of as time. But sometimes I think we lose the sight about the amount of time that we have to give when it comes to getting in the kitchen. And even though we hear things about like quick 30-minute meals, quick 5-minute meals, and even the whole prepping process that we see on social media channels, and where they prepare a certain amount of food and get it individually packaged for a quick reheat. Even with all of those, I think we still sometimes, when it comes down to looking at a recipe, we still lose sight on the aspect of time. Because no matter what we do in this life, everything requires one vital thing that's pretty much priceless, even though the most popular saying is that time is money. And everything requires time. Like I said, we think about the things like the expertise. We think about for the recipe, how comfortable are you in the kitchen, which is an important aspect. And then we think about, well, how much my ingredients are going to cost. We think about what ingredients you do need. We think about everything, where you're going to cook. We think about all these other things that are very important. And so we think about all this, and that's a lot as it is to think about when you're about to do something where it's supposed to be saying, well, this all started out, I'm just trying to cook a meal. I just want lunch. I just want dinner. I just want breakfast. And I have to think about all these things. And the time it takes to think about it, it does affect not only the decision-making process, it can affect the actual process and outcome of these things. And so I think we think about the aspect of time and saying, well, this is taking too long. And I think it's more of a subconscious thing that we do. We say, well, it's taking too long. We get bored with it and we walk away. And even then, I don't think about it as, well, I took too long. I just think about it as I just took my attention and time elsewhere. And so when we even think about aspect of time as money, we focus on the money aspect even in that sentence, because we're thinking that, well, if something takes me a lot of time, then it's going to take me a lot of money, as if it's going to put you in some sort of deficit. But that's not necessarily the case. When you think about the aspect of time when it comes to preparing dishes and it comes to looking at the recipe and knowing how long this will take you. And for the average recipe, depending on where you source it from, if it's like mass marketed, even if it's online, most of the time the average recipe will tell you a estimated time. And most people even go through the whole process of telling you, well, it's going to take you this many minutes to prep, it's going to take you this many minutes to bake, and for a total of this many minutes altogether, or this many hours, whatever it is that you're cooking. And that gives you an aspect of time where you can make, I guess, a quick decision. See, in that aspect, a dish that might take you like 4 hours, there's a brownie out there that people are trying to take 72 hours. But for anyone who sincerely wants to make that dish, no one really feels like they lost any particular money or asset, because they looked at the recipe and it said it's going to take them 72 hours to get a finished product. Most of the time, that 1 second that it took them to read how much time it was going to take them actually saved them time. And I know it sounds ludicrous for me to say this, but if you don't have to think about how much time, you don't have to do that guesstimation, and you know exactly that you're going to need to dedicate or have this amount of time in order to get this process done, then you don't think about it costing you anything in that moment. Most of the time, even the most savvy planners among us are thinking about time and the concept of in the moment. So in that moment, you don't feel like you're taking a lot of time to try to guesstimate. You're looking at a recipe and you say, I want to make this now today, but the recipe doesn't have like the estimated time, but you still want to get a feel for what the recipe says. And they give you time measurements. They suggest you do it this long. They suggest you to bake it this long, to boil until a certain point in time. And when you have to do things like when it has like cooked till done, these are the time frames that if it's not listed in the recipe, that you will have to kind of gauge your estimation yourself. And in that gauging of the estimation, this is the time you have to figure out, is the recipe worth your time? You may be very interested in trying out the recipe to doing it. It's something you wanted to do. But the one thing you have to make sure of is that you really have the time to do it. If you're taking your time on something, but you're not sincerely taking your time on it because you know you're kind of on a tight time restraint, and you're either executing this recipe with the mindset that this may take a little longer than, of course, a 30-minute recipe or a 5-minute quick recipe. This is like an old-fashioned, old-school recipe that you know you need time to do. And you still try to execute it in an amount of time that's not conceivable. What may end up happening is a bad finished product. You can't change how much time something will take. When it comes to us as individuals, we cannot rush any processes. So even if you think you could just put something on Turbo Blast or something else like that, it's not going to work. Discussed about trusting the recipe, and the recipe discussed to us in its little music performance to do what it says.
You ready to what I say?
You have to sometime, we can make certain adjustments. We can probably affect things to probably a few minutes at a time. But if you don't even have a few extra minutes to go through the process of the recipe, it's not worth your time to execute that recipe at that point in time. You can be an expert. You can be anything you want to be. You can have all the fancy equipment. You have all the ingredients. You can have a surplus of everything. So if it all comes to a head, maybe you just do it again. But why? Time is money. For this aspect, if you don't take the necessary amount of time, or you don't have the necessary amount of time in order to do this as successfully as possible, if you do not have the correct amount of time to execute your recipe, you are wasting time and money. But you cannot rush the process, because a lot of times the actual process is even making sure at the very least that these items are done. I use a lot of electric eyes. Electric eye does not get as hot, and sometimes it doesn't keep its heat as well as if I'm working on a stove with natural gas or propane. These things usually get a higher temperature quicker and holds the temperature longer. All of these things take time. I have to account for every single step, even down to knowing what type of heating source I am using. And this is what everyone has to do. And you have to take all these things into account when looking at a recipe or looking at the aspect of preparing yourself to cook. These are things that do matter. Does it really matter? Yes, it does. If you're going through the process of cooking something on the stove, and you know, only thing you have on hand is the electric eye. Maybe the person who wrote the recipe even mentioned putting the recipe on a certain stove setting, a stove setting that is clearly something that natural gas uses or something like propane uses, not an electric eye. And they're giving you the time based on their type of heating source that has a higher amount of heat coming out, a more consistent flow of heat through the eye coming out. And you tell yourself that, well, I was promised that if I cook this meat, if I boil this meat, if I saute or do anything that they tell you to do, and if I just do it for this amount of time, that I was promised I could get exactly what you see on the picture. What you saw in the picture was a finished product, a product that was fully cooked, a product that went through all the processes and is a certain amount of time. Not necessarily the amount of time that the recipe taught you, but the amount of time that was actually required. And that's something you have to pay attention to. That's something that you have to give credence to. You cannot ignore that aspect. I've cooked on pretty much everything. There's certain eyes out there, electric eyes, I could put it up to full max. I know I still need to allot a little bit more time than I would for any other stove. Because even at max, if that recipe told me, based on its stove setting, that it would only take me about 15 minutes or 10 minutes, let's say, to brown this meat and get everything done. And then I look at it, my setting, I even put mine to try to say, I'm going to affect time, turn it up to high. I still notice that it's taking a while for my pan to get hot. And another thing, your pan, your equipment. You have a heavier pan, you have to allot more time. If you're cooking something on a stove and you're using one of those good old-fashioned stainless steel pans, like heavy ones, the ones that actually have weight. They don't have much weight as they used to, but the ones that really used to have weight, or you're using something like a Dutch oven or a cast iron pan. These type of pans typically take longer to build up heat, especially if you're working on something like an electric eye. So you have to allot more time for that as well. So if you're cooking on a heavy pan, looking at a recipe and telling yourself that you were promised that you could have everything cooked and sauteed up in 10 minutes flat, but you're not using their heat source, which is a heat source that can, even at maybe its mid-range setting, that can come and produce more heat than your electric eye, which has to be put on the max to even build up enough heat to do what it is that you want to do for this process. And then you're coupling that with the fact that you're using a good old-fashioned pot, pan, what have you, that has more weight to it. What cooks your food is not necessarily just the eye itself. That thing in between is not just keeping the food off your eye and keeping it clean. Your eye is helping to heat up what is ultimately your cooking instrument. Your pan is your cooking instrument. So you have to wait for it to gain the heat necessary, no matter what you're doing. So you have to make sure that you take everything into account, which means you have to make sure that you truly have the time to do what you need to do in the kitchen. Telling yourself that that you were promised only a certain amount of time that this food has to cook. You have a heavy pan, an electric eye that doesn't build as much heat. The food is not done by 10, 15 minutes. I'm hoping you're not going to be so adamant that you're just going to say, well, this is done, and then go forward and ignore the finished product picture or ignore any particular health aspects when it comes to cooking. Cooking seems like a mundane, everyday thing to do. But it doesn't matter if you're in a commercial kitchen cooking for other people, an establishment, or you're in your own kitchen cooking for yourself. You have to keep it healthy. And the biggest part of keeping it healthy is to make sure that you have food that is done. Not just done because you have put everything in the pot and gone through the process and said, well, I've done everything the recipe told me to do, even based on their time frames. But you're not taking into account that your time frame will be different. It will be longer based on what you're using to cook and what type of environment you have to cook in. But just going through the whole process of just doing the entire recipe and thinking that you have something that's done is not the best use of your time. And you thinking that you did this in a allotted time frame saves you money. It does not. What it does is it takes money and resources away from you. When you don't take the proper amount of time to do something like execute the recipe to this full stage of doneness, it has to be done in order to make sure that you're safe. You prepare any type of food, no matter its process, but you always are mostly taking your time out. Even more so than taste and flavor and texture, is to make sure that it's done and is able to eat safely. That you're eating something that's actually edible. Time is money. If you don't take the proper amount of time to make sure that the recipe was executed according to the instructions or according to any tweaks that you might have to do based on the actual equipment you have on hand, your actual heating source, your actual ingredients, and to paying attention to the actual amount of time required for these processes, regardless of what time or estimated time frame the recipe told you this will take. So taking off 10 minutes to say that, oh, it's done. The recipe told me it'll only take 30 minutes. And yeah, we had 30 minutes exactly. So I'm going to turn everything off, even though the chicken's still pink. Chicken not supposed to be still pink when it's done. You know, and you done things that should be questionable. But again, like I said, it concerns me sometimes because our obsession with time. Us thinking that something has to take a little amount of time in order to save us money, in order to save us certain aspects of our lives that we say we can't get back, or that we've decided to monetize somehow, even though they're actually priceless. But we can't do that. We don't have control over time like that. But what we do have control over is what we actually do with our time, and to actually make sure that we're using our time wisely. And using our time wisely means using our time that is needed to make sure we get a complete and done product. Again, time is money. It won't be worth your investment. Your main investment should have been knowing that you had the amount of time.
We interrupt this program for a special message.
I'm not St. Patty, living in the 4th centuries. Made his way to history books. And about 700 years later, our man had his very own day. Talk about leaving your fruits. I'm a great man, St. Patty. I was born and raised in Ireland. How are ya? I'm lurking. Oh, yeah, bet your bottom dollar you've been looking this way and that you'll be catching me vittles or recipes. Maybe I don't know. Yeah, better chance of you finding me pots of gold. So what's I be enjoying this as silly this? Teacher lots of lessons early. That's to be cooking. Good luck.
Again, yeah, yeah. Come on again, yeah, yeah. Come on, bring me some love. Say that why don't you walk away? I'm sorry. Rockin' woman, she is sad. I said she messing with my holiday. Guess you don't have me with my hippo serve. Ah, what you want and what? What can I talk about what? What can I talk about what? What can I, you must be joking. Show today. Gotta get a Sinead, that's some beating. Can't you see me sitting here doing some eating? That may be St. Patty's Day. Hey, 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 hey. But lucky is the luck you
Thank you again for joining us for another week. We hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.